Tommy T-Bone McGraw had been driving 18-wheelers across America's vast and varied highways for over 20 years. Known for his punctuality, professionalism, and an old-school love for the open road, Tommy had seen it all, or so he thought. One foggy October night outside the small town of Hawthorne, a place infamous among truckers as the Black Hole due to its mysterious and often unexplained occurrences, Tommy had an encounter that would haunt him for the rest of his days. The fog was unusually thick that night, wrapping around Tommy's truck like a damp, suffocating blanket. His destination was a distribution center several states away, where he was to deliver a load of canned goods. He was following his usual route, a lonely, winding road that snaked through the dense forest, when a chill ran down his spine, the kind that had nothing to do with the temperature. The CB radio crackled to life, emitting static that was quickly replaced by a faint, distorted voice. It came from an old CB channel Tommy hadn't used in years, one that had largely fallen out of favor among truckers. "Breaker, breaker, this is Ghost Rider. Anyone out there? Over." Tommy's heart skipped a beat. Ghost Rider was the CB handle of Billy Banshee Johnson, a fellow trucker who had died 10 years ago in a horrific accident on this very stretch of road. The tragedy had been the talk of the trucker community for months. The idea that Billy, or something pretending to be Billy, was calling out to him now was terrifying. Driven by a mix of curiosity and a sense of duty to an old friend, Tommy picked up the microphone. "This is T-Bone. Come again, Ghost Rider. Over." There was a long, eerie silence before the voice returned, clearer and more urgent. "T-Bone, you gotta help me. The convoy. They're coming. They never left. Over." Before Tommy could ask what Billy meant, the fog seemed to part, revealing a convoy of trucks ahead. Their headlights cut through the mist, casting an eerie glow. The trucks moved slowly, almost too slowly, and as Tommy drew closer, he noticed they were old, much older than any trucks he'd seen on the road in recent years. Their paint was faded and rusted, their license plates bearing numbers and letters that hadn't been used for decades. Tommy's blood ran cold as he recognized the convoy. It was the Lost Fleet, a group of truckers who had disappeared without a trace in the 1970s. They were legendary in the trucking community, with tales of their ghostly appearances passed down through generations. According to the stories, they were taken by the spirits of the road, doomed to drive eternally as a spectral convoy. The radio crackled again. "Don't join them, T-Bone. They're looking for new souls to take. Turn back now." Over. Tommy's heart pounded as he tried to turn his truck off the highway. But the steering wheel wouldn't budge, and the pedals seemed to have a mind of their own, as if an invisible force was guiding him toward the convoy. The faces of the other drivers came into view, pale, hollow-eyed, staring straight ahead with expressions of eternal despair. A cold hand suddenly gripped Tommy's shoulder. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Billy Banshee Johnson sitting in the passenger seat. Billy's form was flickering, like a bad TV signal, but his eyes were sharp and full of urgency. "You have to trust me, T-Bone," Billy said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "There's a way out. Follow my lead." Billy's presence filled Tommy with a strange mix of fear and comfort. He managed to regain some control over the truck, following Billy's directions as they led him down an old, overgrown road that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. The fog lifted slightly, the oppressive feeling easing just enough for Tommy to catch his breath. As they sped down the abandoned road, Tommy couldn't shake the feeling that they were being pursued. The headlights of the ghostly convoy seemed to flicker in the distance, and the air was thick with a sense of impending doom. Billy's voice guided him, calm but insistent, directing him through turns and past landmarks that only someone intimately familiar with the area would know. After what felt like an eternity, the road widened and the fog began to lift. The first light of dawn broke on the horizon, casting a pale glow over the landscape. Tommy pulled over at the next truck stop, his hands trembling as he cut the engine. He turned to thank Billy, but his passenger seat was empty. The CB radio was silent, no trace of the conversation or the spectral guidance he had received. Tommy slumped back in his seat, trying to process what had just happened. He reached for the CB microphone, half expecting to hear Billy's voice again, but there was nothing but static. The events of the night played over and over in his mind. The images of the lost fleet and Billy's spectral form burned into his memory. Years passed, but Tommy never forgot that night. He retired from trucking soon after, unable to shake the feeling of being watched whenever he was on the road. He moved to a small town, far from any major highways, and spent his days gardening and working on his old truck. He became a regular at the local diner, where he would share his story with anyone willing to listen. The tale of the lost fleet and Billy Banshee Johnson became a local legend, a cautionary tale told to new truckers who passed through town. Some scoffed at the story, dismissing it as the ramblings of an old man who had spent too many years on the road. But others, those who had experienced the strange and unexplainable themselves, listened with rapt attention, their own experiences lending credence to Tommy's words. As the years went by, the legend of the lost fleet grew. Truckers passing through Hawthorne reported seeing strange lights in the fog, hearing voices on the CB that shouldn't be there, and feeling an inexplicable chill as they drove the lonely roads at night. Some claimed to have seen the ghostly convoy themselves, the spectral trucks appearing and disappearing like phantoms. One night, a young trucker named Jake was making his way through Hawthorne, his route taking him along the same winding road where Tommy had his encounter. The fog was thick, and the air was heavy with an unsettling stillness. Jake's CB crackled to life, a faint voice cutting through the static. "Breaker, breaker, this is Ghost Rider. Anyone out there? Over." Jake's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the handle. He had heard Tommy's story many times, but he had always been skeptical. Now, faced with the reality of it, he wasn't sure what to think. Summoning his courage, he picked up the microphone. "This is Jake. Come again, Ghost Rider. Over." The voice came back, clearer and more urgent. "Jake, you gotta help me. The convoy, they're coming. They never left. Over." Jake's hands tightened on the wheel as the fog parted, revealing the convoy of trucks ahead. They were old, their paint faded and rusted, moving with an eerie slowness. Jake's mind raced as he recalled Tommy's story, the warnings and the details that now seemed all too real. His CB crackled again. "Don't join them, Jake. They're looking for new souls to take. Turn back now. Over." Jake tried to turn his truck, but it felt as if an invisible force was holding him on the path. Panic set in as the faces of the other drivers came into view, pale, hollow-eyed, staring straight ahead with expressions of eternal despair. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see a figure in the passenger seat, flickering like a bad TV signal. "You have to trust me, Jake," the figure said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "There's a way out. Follow my lead." Jake nodded, his heart pounding as he followed the directions given by the spectral figure. They took a sharp turn onto an old, overgrown road that seemed to appear out of nowhere, the fog lifting slightly as they sped away from the ghostly convoy. After what felt like hours, Jake found himself back on a familiar highway, the dawn breaking on the horizon. He pulled over at the next truck stop, his hands shaking as he cut the engine. The passenger seat was empty, and the CB was silent. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. Jake continued his route, but he never forgot that night. The experience changed him, and he made a point to share his story with other truckers, passing on the legend of the lost fleet and the spectral guide who had saved him. The tale spread, becoming part of the fabric of trucker lore, a reminder that some roads are better left untraveled, and some spirits are best left undisturbed. As for Tommy, he lived out his days in peace, knowing that he had helped preserve the memory of his friend and the warning of the lost fleet. He passed away quietly in his sleep, leaving behind a legacy of cautionary tales and a reminder of the strange and unexplainable things that can happen on the open road. And on foggy nights, if you listen closely, You might still hear the faint voice of Ghost Rider on the CB, warning you to turn back before it's too late.